take better lecture notes. There are 7 things listed here, a couple of little sub-points, so this will hopefully be easy for you to follow. People who are really good note takers, and there aren't that many of them actually because that's a skill, end up doing almost all of these things regularly. It's just a habit. People who are not good note takers don't do any of these, or maybe they just do one. So if you can learn to do them, you'll be better at note taking than most people. The first one on the list has nothing to do with taking notes in class. It just has to do with preparing for lectures. There are 2 suggestions there, and I don't know if anybody here does these already or not, but they're actually very simple but very helpful when the lecture starts. The first one of these, so this is the little sub-point under number 1, is to review the notes. And what notes are we talking about here? Right, the previous notes from the last time you were in class. Most teachers, when they lecture, when that's their main way of teaching, when they come into the classroom, they put everything down, they might take roll, and then usually they don't review a lot. They just sort of hit the ground running right where they left off the time before. If it's been 5 days, if it's been a week since you were in there last time, it's really hard to remember what the teacher was talking about at the end of class, and as a result, there's hard to focus at the beginning. So if you were to spend 5 to 10 minutes before class, right before or earlier that morning or even the night before, just kind of remembering that, it helps. And then the other one that's part of that is previewing the textbook. And so if you have a teacher who lectures basically from the textbook, so every time you go there's a chapter covered, for you to spend 15 minutes before you go to class and become familiar with the main terms, the summary, all of that, it helps you when the teacher talks to start following them right from the beginning. It's kind of warming up your brain. And so these, again, might take a total of 20 or 30 minutes to do, number 1, but it actually helps a lot when the lecture begins. So this is a very basic one, and there's a lot more that I could say about that, but I'm going to go ahead and move on. The second one on the list is something that I always explain to my students early in the semester, very early, and that is, when in doubt, write it down. That's my rule for note-taking. Are you able to write down everything the teacher says? No, unless you are the fastest writer ever. So that means all the time while you're listening to the teacher, you have to make choices. Should I write that? Do I not need to write that? And sometimes it's really hard to tell whether you should write something or not. Is that important or not? Some teachers are really good about telling you, this is really important, write it down. That's nice. But most teachers don't do that. They just talk. And so one of the reasons that you want to do these things is so that when you get to class and you listen to the teacher, you already have an idea of what's important in the book or what was made important last time, and then you can make good choices. But the other part of this is, if you're ever in a class and the teacher's talking fast and you're trying to write things down and you're trying to decide, if you get to a point where they're saying something and you hesitate and you think, should I write that or not? What's the best thing to do? Write it down. Okay, it's much better to make a mistake on the side of writing too much in your notes rather than not enough. And oftentimes in my class, I see students looking at me and paying attention to me, and so that's nice to see. But then I make several points in a row, and I look, and they just are sitting there, just like it's a conversation, and they're listening to me, but they're not writing any of it down. That makes me always very nervous because there may be a test 2 weeks or 3 weeks later, and I know that most of them aren't going to remember anything of what I said. If you write it down, as I said before, you get to go back and review it later. So if you're ever wondering, it's like 50-50, should I write that or not? Go ahead and write it. If you're pretty much sure it's not important, go ahead and skip it. But it's better to write too much than not at all. Okay, so that's very simple principle number 2. Okay, now for these next couple, I'm going to slow down a little, take a little more time. Number 3 is my my main advice that I give students about note-taking, and that's to go on a diet, which sounds like a very strange suggestion. Anyone want to guess what I mean by that? Yeah, that's right. When somebody goes on a diet and they lose a lot of weight, what happens to their body? It shrinks, right? That's what you're trying to do. Now, I just got through telling you that the number one mistake that most people make is that they don't write enough. They sit and listen, but they don't write enough. That's a problem. The second most common problem is this, and that is once their hand starts moving and they start writing, they write way too many words. And every time you're writing these words, the teacher is always talking faster than you're writing, which means you're falling further and further behind. It gets very frustrating, especially if your teacher really is fast, like a lot of them are. And so what you should do is learn to go on a diet. There are actually several ways to do that, but I'm going to show you one and kind of illustrate it and then give you another one. 2 ideas, okay? The first one, so again, this is under number 3, is to learn how to use abbreviations a lot when you take notes. Most of you who take notes now probably use a few of those, but I want you to learn how to use even more. And so I want to ask a question before I show you what I have in mind here. Some people I ask, do you use abbreviations when you take notes? And they say, oh no, I would never do that. And I ask them why, and what do you think their reason is? Yeah, they're terrified, and this is a good fear. They're terrified that they're going to forget what that's an abbreviation of, and then when they go back to their notes, they don't even understand them. So that's a problem, okay? But I have something in mind for you, so let me show you this. If you were in a history class, and you walked in on the day of the lecture, and your teacher said, today in class, we're going to talk about the period of history in our country after the Civil War, which was called Reconstruction. So that's the whole subject of the lecture. Well, you're going to have to write that word, Reconstruction, a lot. You don't want to write that a lot. It's a very long word. And also, and some of you who are taking more technical classes, if you don't know how to spell a word, that slows you down even more because you're trying to get it right. So I want to write the word reconstruction here, and I know how to spell it, so that makes it faster. But just look, you don't have to time it on your watch or anything, but look how long it takes me, even if I write fast, to write that word. Okay, what is the teacher doing while I'm writing that? Yeah, talking. If you ever get a teacher who says, that's a long word, I'll wait while you all write it down, you should almost have a heart attack. They never do that. They're just talking. Okay, so while you're writing, they're getting further and further away from you, and so this is a mistake. Well, one abbreviation that people sometimes think of for this would be something like this, and that's a lot shorter, and even though it doesn't seem like it matters that much, every second is kind of important when you're racing to stay up with the teacher. So this would be good. What's wrong with this abbreviation? Yeah, this could stand for lots of things, right? And that's what we were talking about before. You don't want to get confused about that. But I'm going to give you a suggestion, and I know this is going to sound like a bad idea, but you just have to sort of hang with me for a minute. My favorite abbreviation of this